stories beyond imagination.
Imagine this. In a galaxy where fortunes are measured in planets and the richest, beings dine on starlight itself. The last person you'd expect to change everything is a janitor. Yet that's exactly what happened. Lady Theryn Veyl, an alien billionaire whose empire stretched across the Orion Cluster, once entered a grand summit with her disabled child. Surrounded by shimmering towers, jeweled robes, and technology that bent reality itself, she believed nothing in this universe could surprise her anymore. But then she saw something that wealth could never buy. A small act of human kindness. This is the story of how a simple janitor from Earth, ordinary, overlooked, and ignored, did something so profound that it forever altered the way one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy understood life, compassion, and the true meaning of worth. Sci-fi often dazzles us with alien worlds, futuristic technologies, and unimaginable wealth. But beneath all the spectacle, the most powerful stories are about connection, about the things that unite us across species, across galaxies, and across circumstances we cannot control. This tale isn't just about spaceships or empires. It's about what happens when unimaginable power collides with the simplest of gestures. Lady Theryn had everything: wealth beyond imagination, political influence, and access to the most advanced medicine in the known universe. Yet her son Arien was born frail, disabled in body though sharp in mind, and no treatment could fix him. For years she saw him pitied or ignored by others, until, in a single moment, an Earth janitor showed her child the one thing that no empire, no amount of credits, and no scientific breakthrough could ever replace. The problem began long before that encounter. In Lady Theryn's world, worth was measured by power, perfection, and wealth. Disability was considered weakness, and weakness had no place among the elite of Zerath Prime. Arien was treated like a porcelain ornament, present, but fragile and hidden. His mother loved him deeply, but also carried the weight of shame that society imposed on her. She poured endless resources into cures that failed, hiding her heartbreak behind icy elegance. Meanwhile, Daniel Rains, the janitor, struggled on the opposite end of the spectrum. Humanity was new to the galactic community, often relegated to menial roles. Daniel wasn't a scientist, soldier, or diplomat. He was invisible. And yet, in a world obsessed with status, both Arien and Daniel shared something. They were overlooked, undervalued, and dismissed by the very society around them. Finding authentic stories in a galaxy saturated with spectacle is hard. For every epic battle and every technological marvel, there are countless cliches: heroic warriors, flawless leaders, civilizations that never stumble. But where were the stories about imperfection, about vulnerability? For Arien, every public appearance meant silent judgment. Attendants whispered. Nobles avoided his gaze. His life, in all its richness of thought and imagination, was overshadowed by what his body could not do. For Daniel, every day meant scrubbing floors and being treated as furniture by beings who saw humans as primitive. He had no illusions of grandeur, no dreams of recognition. His battle was survival, his weapon, a mop. Both lived in worlds where they were either pitied or invisible, and that shared invisibility became the foundation for something extraordinary. The challenge wasn't just personal, it was cultural. Societies across the stars celebrated strength, beauty, and achievement, while weakness or imperfection was shunned. Lady Theryn's pride clashed constantly with her love for Arien. She wanted him to be seen, but not pitied. She wanted him to be valued, but not for what others considered broken. And Daniel, well, he wanted nothing more than to be treated as a person, not a shadow sweeping up the crumbs of the powerful. Both carried silent burdens in a world that wasn't designed for them. The stage was set. A boy born into unimaginable wealth, but trapped in a body that betrayed him, and a man born into obscurity, but carrying a heart unburdened by judgment. The collision of these two lives was inevitable, but no one could have predicted how much it would change the galaxy's view of worth itself. The night of the Galactic Summit was unlike any other. The pavilion glittered with chandeliers of suspended plasma, the air humming with languages from 100 worlds. Nobles arrived in robes woven from living light, each vying to outshine the other. Lady Theryn moved through the crowd with Arien's grav chair gliding beside her, her expression a mask of control. She had attended these summits for decades, sealing trade deals and cementing her power. But this year was different. Her son's presence drew attention she despised, glances dripping with pity, whispers that even her immeasurable wealth could not fix what was broken. She felt those eyes burning into her pride. And then, amid the splendor, a janitor mopping the glass floor caught Arien's attention. The boy's eyes lingered, his lips twitching in a half-smile that Theryn had not seen in weeks. It was absurd. Why, in this ocean of wealth and wonder, did her son notice a human with a mop? The night of the Galactic Summit was unlike any other. The pavilion glittered with chandeliers of suspended plasma, the air humming with languages from 100 worlds. Nobles arrived in robes woven from living light, each vying to outshine the other. Lady Theryn moved through the crowd with Arien's grav chair gliding beside her, her expression a mask of control. She had attended these summits for decades, sealing trade deals and cementing her power. But this year was different. Her son's presence drew attention she despised, glances dripping with pity, whispers that even her immeasurable wealth could not fix what was broken. She felt those eyes burning into her pride. And then, amid the splendor, a janitor mopping the glass floor caught Arien's attention. The boy's eyes lingered, his lips twitching in a half-smile that Theryn had not seen in weeks. It was absurd. Why, in this ocean of wealth and wonder, did her son notice a human with a mop? Daniel Rains didn't think much of it. To him, kindness was natural, not calculated. When he steadied Arien's chair, he wasn't thinking of wealth or consequence. He was thinking only of a boy about to fall. But that single gesture pierced the layers of formality that had suffocated Arien's life. The boy's halting "thank you" was perhaps the first time someone outside. His family spoke to him as though he were not fragile porcelain, but a child worth acknowledging. Daniel smiled and carried on, but Arien's world shifted. He had been surrounded by attendants who obeyed his mother, physicians who spoke in clinical tones, and nobles who ignored him entirely. And then came Daniel, ordinary, unnoticed, and yet more genuine than anyone else Arien had ever met. The reaction, however, did not go unnoticed. One of Lady Theryn's aides saw Arien's sudden laughter and hurried to inform her. Theryn, still listening to a trade negotiation, turned and saw her son clutching the crude wooden bird as if it were a priceless treasure. She frowned at first. How could such a cheap trinket mean more to him than the gifts she had showered him with? Gifts worth more than cities? But her son's expression froze her heart. Joy. Unfiltered, unguarded joy. The kind she had not seen in years. And at the center of it all was a human janitor, kneeling beside him. For the first time, Lady Theryn Veyl, the richest woman in the Orion Cluster, felt powerless in the face of something she could not buy. Word of the encounter spread quietly through the pavilion. Some guests mocked the scene, a noble child laughing at a servant's toy. Others dismissed it as irrelevant. But a few, watching closely, recognized something deeper. The moment when two invisible lives touched across the divide of wealth and species. Arien, usually withdrawn and silent, clung to the wooden bird as if it anchored him. Daniel, meanwhile, returned to his duties, not seeking thanks or recognition. To him, kindness required no audience. Yet for Lady Theryn, the puzzle deepened. All her wealth had failed to bring such happiness to her son, but a janitor's gesture had succeeded. That realization gnawed at her pride, challenging the foundations of her world. Something inside her whispered that perhaps she had been measuring value all wrong. The summit stretched on, filled with the endless drone of negotiations and the clinking of crystal glasses. Lady Theryn sat at the head of her table, surrounded by the galaxy's most powerful beings, but her attention kept drifting back to Arien. He wasn't listening to political debates or speeches. Instead, he was quietly turning the little wooden bird over in his hands, studying it with fascination. For the first time in years, his face was animated. His lips moved in whispers, as though talking to himself or to the bird. Theryn's heart twisted. She had given him hover dragons, plasma toys, and neural interfaces designed by the best artisans of Zerath Prime, but none had brought this light to his eyes. How could something carved by a janitor, rough, flawed, worthless by market standards, hold so much power over her son? She felt an unfamiliar emotion stir within her, humility. As the evening wound down, Theryn excused herself from the council and made her way to where Arien rested. To her surprise, Daniel was still there, kneeling beside the grav chair, listening intently as Arien spoke in broken, halting words. Arien rarely tried to communicate outside their chambers, but here he was, struggling through sentences, determined to share his thoughts with the janitor who had given him the bird. Daniel wasn't impatient nor dismissive. He leaned close, nodding, smiling, encouraging each word. For Theryn, it was surreal. Hundreds of beings had spoken to Arien before, most with forced politeness or clinical tones. Yet here, a human with no status, no wealth, no name, was drawing out her son's voice in ways no physician or tutor had ever managed. It was as if Arien had found someone who saw him, not his condition, not his weakness, but him. But the galaxy is never short of judgment. Several nobles nearby began whispering, their eyes darting between Theryn, her son, and the janitor. Some smirked, amused that the great Lady Veyl's heir was laughing over a servant's trinket. Others looked disgusted, as though the very idea of mingling with a janitor was beneath them. Theryn's pride flared, old instincts urging her to order Daniel away. Yet when she looked at her son, his laughter, his trembling hands holding the bird close, she faltered. For once, Arien was not an object of pity. He was simply a boy, happy, alive. And the cause of that joy was not another billionaire's gift, not another expensive invention, but the humility and kindness of an Earth janitor. It was a truth Theryn could not ignore, no matter how uncomfortable it made her. The whispers grew louder, and one noble even dared to sneer, "Is this what your wealth has come to, Lady Veyl? A son who treasures garbage from the hands of vermin?" The words struck like a blade. But before Theryn could respond, Arien's small, halting voice cut through the air. "Not garbage." He clutched the wooden bird tightly, his eyes fierce for the first time in his life. "It's mine." The hall fell silent. Those who had mocked him stared in shock. Lady Theryn froze, her breath caught in her throat. Her son, so often ignored, silenced, or pitied, had spoken not with weakness but with defiance. And he had done so in defense of a janitor's gift. It was a moment that seemed to ripple through the room, shattering assumptions, silencing arrogance. In that instant, Lady Theryn realized the truth. All her power, her fortune, her influence, it had failed to give Arien what Daniel had offered in minutes, dignity. Her son wasn't broken. He wasn't a burden. He was a child who needed to be seen, respected and loved for who he was, not judged for what he couldn't do. Tears stung her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away before the watching nobles. She turned to Daniel, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "Thank you," she whispered. The janitor simply nodded, as if the gratitude of a billionaire was nothing compared to the smile of a child. For Theryn, the revelation was overwhelming. In that fragile, unforgettable moment, her entire world shifted. The silence in the hall stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Nobles shifted in their seats, unsure how to respond to the defiant words of a child they had always dismissed. Lady Theryn stood tall, her pride and vulnerability colliding within her. For the first time, she didn't shield Arien from the gaze of others. She let him be seen, exactly as he was. Daniel rose slowly, ready to retreat, sensing the tension. But before he could, Arien reached for his hand, holding it with surprising strength. The gesture shocked everyone. It was as though the fragile boy, born into unimaginable wealth, was declaring that this human janitor was his equal, perhaps even his friend. Theryn's heart clenched. For years she had tried to buy her son's acceptance, but it was earned by kindness that cost nothing. The realization both humbled and terrified her. The summit ended, but the echoes of that moment lingered. News spread through the Orion Cluster with lightning speed. Some mocked the scene as weakness, a billionaire undone by a janitor. Others, however, began to whisper of something greater, a lesson hidden in the encounter. For the first time, discussions turned not toward wealth or power, but toward dignity and compassion. Meanwhile, Theryn wrestled with herself. Could she truly allow a mere janitor to continue influencing her son? The old Theryn would have dismissed Daniel the moment the summit ended, but something within her shifted. Every time she saw Arien clutch the wooden bird, smiling as though it were the greatest treasure in the galaxy, she knew this man had given her son what the galaxy could not. To cast him aside would be to cast aside the truth she had just discovered. Days turned to weeks, and Lady Theryn did something no one expected. She summoned Daniel. Not to scold him, not to remind him of his place, but to invite him into her household not as a servant, but as Arien's companion. Daniel was stunned. He had lived his life invisible, unremarkable. Yet now the richest woman in the Orion Cluster was asking him to play a role, more important than any treasure, helping her son find joy. Arien's face lit up when he saw Daniel enter their chambers, wooden bird in hand. Their bond deepened. Daniel taught Arien simple earth games, carved more toys, and spoke to him as though he were not broken but whole. For Theryn, watching her son laugh and speak more freely than ever before was both painful and healing. Painful because it revealed how much he had lacked. Healing because she finally understood what mattered most. Theryn's empire remained vast, her wealth untouched, but her priorities began to shift. Where once she had flaunted her fortune in jewels and grand halls, she now invested in accessibility. Public spaces across Zerath Prime began to change, redesigned to welcome those once ignored. Advanced technologies were no longer reserved for the elite. They were reimagined for the disabled, the marginalized, the invisible. Other nobles scoffed at first, but the undeniable transformation of her son silenced many. They could not argue with what they saw. Arien was happier, stronger in spirit, more present than ever before. And at the center of it all was Daniel Rains, the human janitor who had become both mentor and friend. It was as if a single act of kindness had triggered a wave that spread across worlds, reshaping culture itself. Daniel never sought recognition. He still wore simple clothes, still carried the humility of a worker who knew the value of effort. Yet now, when he walked the halls of Zerath Prime, beings of power paused to acknowledge him. Not because of his title, he had none. Not because of his wealth, he had none, but because he had reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten, that worth is not measured in riches, but in the dignity we give one another. For Arien, Daniel was not just a friend, but a doorway into the wider world. Through Daniel, he experienced laughter, learning, and the kind of freedom no grav chair or machine could provide. For Theryn, the change was profound. She no longer saw her son as fragile or broken. She saw him as complete, and she owed that revelation to a janitor she once would have ignored. Stories of the encounter spread far beyond Zerath Prime. On distant colonies, workers whispered of the janitor, who had taught a billionaire the value of compassion. On core worlds, debates erupted in council chambers about what it truly meant to be civilized. Some resisted, clinging to old hierarchies of wealth and perfection, but others began to listen. For the first time, voices long ignored were given platforms. Disabled children were celebrated, their creativity and resilience honored. Laborers were treated with more respect, no longer invisible. The movement wasn't perfect, nor was it immediate. But the spark had been lit, and it grew brighter with each telling of the story. In taverns, marketplaces, and even academic halls, one question began to echo. If a janitor could change the galaxy with kindness, what excuse did anyone else have? For Daniel, this sudden attention was overwhelming. He never asked to be a symbol, yet he had become one. Still, he kept his focus simple, caring for Arien. That, to him, was enough. For Lady Theryn, however, the transformation was both personal and political. She found herself speaking less of trade routes and more of inclusion, less of wealth and more of dignity. Old allies questioned her judgment. Some even tried to undermine her. But her newfound clarity gave her strength. For years, she had believed her fortune defined her. Now she knew the truth. It was her son's laughter. His joy, his dignity, that mattered. And the more she embraced this truth, the more unshakable her influence became. Power built on compassion proved stronger than power built on fear. And so, a story that began with silence ended with transformation. Lady Theryn Veyl, the richest woman in the Orion Cluster, discovered that no empire, no technology, no amount of wealth could bring her son happiness. That gift came from Daniel Rains, an overlooked human janitor, whose kindness cost nothing but changed everything. Arien was no longer seen as fragile porcelain, but as a child of courage, imagination, and laughter. And across the galaxy, beings who once judged worth by perfection began to see value in imperfection. The tale became legend, told in countless variations. Some remembered it as the moment an alien, billionaire humbled herself before a janitor. Others spoke of it as the day the galaxy began to shift its values. But at its heart, the story remained simple. A boy laughed, a man listened, and a mother learned. In the glittering halls of wealth, where arrogance once reigned supreme, a wooden bird carved by rough human hands shone brighter than all the jewels of Zerath, Prime. And from that small act of kindness, the future took a different path. So, what does this story mean for us? Maybe it's a reminder that greatness isn't found in riches or titles, but in the way we treat those around us. Maybe it's proof that the smallest gestures can echo louder than the grandest displays of power. The galaxy of our imagination isn't so different from our own world. Both are shaped by choices, by compassion, by the willingness to see others not as invisible, but as human. What about you? What act of kindness has left the deepest mark on your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, check out my other videos exploring the most mind-blowing sci-fi tales you won't believe exist. Until next time, stay curious and never underestimate the power of kindness.